Introducing TiVo Stream 4K. All your favorite entertainment, live or streaming, on one screen. TiVo Stream 4K. Streaming solved.
Hi, Advertising Week. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Victoria Sakal, Managing Director of Brand Intelligence with Morning Consult, talking all things streaming with TiVo's VP of Product, Chris Thun, today. So, Chris, it's interesting and frankly a very important time to be in media and entertainment these days as everyone is stuck at home. What are you seeing over the past 6 months or so from a trends perspective? Are any streaming trends particularly accelerated or maybe even impacted by the coronavirus?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. It's crazy times. I mean, if you look at Nielsen, and they did a comparison in terms of consumption pre and post stay at home in terms of early March versus April, you see consumption really spiking from a streaming perspective. In some markets, more than 60%. The media industry has never really seen such a captive audience craving entertainment. Now, it's not all rosy, and the other side of the equation is we see advertising down 25%, driven by verticals like auto and travel having even sharper declines. And so these are interesting times for sure.
Given what we just talked about, how media and streaming have evolved in the current environment, could you provide some background on where TiVo is coming from and kind of how that fits in today in this current environment?
Pay TV operators around the world really modernize their approach and their experience and combine pay TV content, live, linear, DVR, with the new streaming services like Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu into a unified experience. And then phase 3, which we're clearly in this year, is TiVo's really entering the streaming wars. And what we see is a lot of the big brands, whether it be Disney Plus, whether it be Peacock, HBO Max, more conservatively going consumer direct. And from a consumer perspective, there are just a lot more options in terms of where to watch your entertainment. And that's a space that TiVo is very well positioned to play.
So this is especially exciting to me since our research has showed, especially in recent months, that taking this consumer-centric approach, really thinking through the user's perspective, internalizing pain points, realizing that you may have them in a kind of concentrated environment now, but things may change or they may be really susceptible to perceiving their experience in this moment. It sounds like TiVo is really leaning into that exactly. You know, how can we improve the experience? You have so many streaming providers and options, but at some point there'll be kind of this moment of reckoning, or maybe even already you're kind of trying to navigate to find the show you're looking for. Is this right? This is kind of the orientation TiVo is taking?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the most common questions I've gotten outside of work in the past several months in these crazy times is, what are you watching on TV? I mean, the question has come from family on the opposite side of the country. It's come from friends on the opposite side of town. People are just looking to be entertained. And the thing is, after you get a recommendation, that's just the first step, because the next step is, where is that show? Is it on Netflix? Is it on Amazon? Is it on Peacock, HBO Max, Disney Plus? The options just keep multiplying. And that's really the pain point that from a TiVo perspective, we're laser focused on solving. And so we launched a product in the May timeframe that's called TiVo Stream 4K. And the objective of the product is to break down the traditional app silos, which has been the normal paradigm from a user experience perspective, and really unify all your movies and shows into a single experience, and make it easier for you to sit down and keep track of all the shows that you're watching.
Thanks, Chris. I can totally understand that experience. You know, you've heard of a great show and it becomes, where do I find it? And that there's kind of solutions out there is really exciting. I'm sure all of the consumers will appreciate that. That said, I'm sure that there are some serious giants kind of competing with TiVo in this space, probably trying to solve for the same thing. Could you talk a little bit about who those players are and how your kind of uniquely tackling this opportunity within this ecosystem?
Sure, be happy to. And by the way, the fact that the big names are after solving the same problem is a sign that A, it's a big problem and it's worth solving. But in terms of the different approach that we're taking, and I spoke to this a bit in some of my prior responses, but traditionally the incumbent streaming platforms have really gone to market in terms of a sea of apps. And that's been a universal paradigm, both on the smartphone as well as the TV. And what TiVo is doing is, rather than starting from a sea of apps, we're starting from the opposite end of the spectrum, which is, from a consumer perspective, having to think where you want to watch before you decide what to watch seems backwards. And instead, by unifying all your entertainment and truly giving you recommendations that are agnostic to where the content is coming from, and then directing you to where you want to play back that content, that seems a lot more natural. And I'm not saying that the large competitors are not acknowledging that that's where the market is headed. You see great work being done by Apple in terms of Apple TV Plus, in terms of unified discovery. You see Google entering the market. But what's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years is whether everybody can get the ecosystem to play along. You see gaps in some of the competitors that are trying to duplicate what TiVo's doing from a unified discovery perspective, in terms of the big streaming services not wanting to play along.
How do you beat them while you're also kind of have to join them by default? And then kind of more broadly, what does that mean for advertisers looking to have a presence in this space, and who do they work with, and how do they navigate their budgets in that context?
Yeah, it's a great question. And firstly, from a competitive perspective, the content stores, whether it be Amazon Prime or Amazon Video, whether it be Netflix, whether it be any of the usual suspects, we're a partner. And we're a very strong partner in terms of driving engagement with their catalogs and driving new acquisition. And we think there's a big opportunity to work more closely with them in terms of being on the side of the consumer, looking at consumer behavior and an individual consumer's taste profile, in recommending which set of services are best for them going forward. And so I think that's a win-win in terms of all the players in the ecosystem, but most importantly, it's a consumer. Now, the other thing we're doing that I think is unique is we're investing very heavily in terms of universal discovery in ad-supported content, AVOD, and complementing the content that a consumer can get from both a linear subscription as well as from the various subscription services, and watch free content with the only tax being watching some ads. And we know from the growth of the industry and what's been happening over the past 12 to 18 months, that that's a model that consumers love and the industry loves it, in terms of the ability to reach, through quality advertising, great audiences that are actively engaged.
It's definitely an interesting trade-off where it becomes more economical for the consumer, and at the same time to be watching a couple of ads, you know, as you said, it kind of is a win-win, but it's this thing that consumers are used to anyways, watching ads for the content that they want to watch. So, you know, could you talk a little bit more about how you're thinking about removing that overlap and the cost savings that it's driving for consumers, really leaning into that consumer first approach?
Yeah, and again, really good question. And the way we think about it is give the consumer choice, allow the consumer to decide which model they want to embrace. And so at every key product decision-making point, we clearly ask ourselves, you know, what's in the best interest of the consumer here, and how do we give the reins to them to decide? And so I'll give you an example of that. When you enter our product, you're asked, what are the services that you either subscribe to today or want to? And we increasingly are working towards giving you recommendations on what those services should be. And you can turn on and off what is flowing through our universal discovery and through the recommendations, and make it only the content that you're paying for. Similarly, if you think about the guide and where we see some of the most active activity in our new TiVo Stream 4K product, is in the linear guide, which, by the way, after all these years through the decades, is the simplest way for people to just sit back and change the channel and watch TV. And so even today, it is the major engagement driver. But what we're doing that's new is, instead of a large pay TV company programming that guide, we're really giving the reins to the consumer, where consumer can decide, hey, I want to combine a subscription from Sling TV, and here's what I want my lineup to be. I want to add local channels from a donation-only service like Lowcast to that guide. And by the way, I want the following services from an AVOD perspective, whether it be Pluto or otherwise, flowing through that guide as well. And that becomes my personalized guide, which is very different style of TV watching than the industry has typically taken to market.
So building off of that, I know we're kind of coming to the end of our conversation here. We talked about where the consumer is coming from, how the environment has evolved, especially with acceleration from the coronavirus. Looking to the future, do we expect a totally different vision? Are there elements of what's changed in recent months you expect to shift? What's kind of the big end goal and the vision that TiVo is working towards?
So first of all, let me kind of tie it back to the insights that we saw in the beginning of this conversation. I definitely believe that the acceleration we've seen in terms of embracing OTT content, whether it be AVOD or SVOD, that acceleration, I believe we've compressed years of adoption into months. Now, I think there's some intelligent people could debate to what degree there's going to be a regression if and when we come out of this, in months. But at the same time, that acceleration happened, and I don't think you can put it back in the box at this point in time. And where we see a lot of the trends moving is consumers taking control of how they're spending their entertainment budgets. And instead of giving a budget to one company month after month after month, increasingly deciding how to allocate and build their own bundle across linear, across SVOD, and what AVOD services they want. And what we're trying to empower through TiVo Stream 4K is, again, in giving the reins to the consumer, you can combine a package from Sling TV, linear lineup, with local channels from Lowcast, with an SVOD subscription like Netflix for $40, $45, when the equivalent, combining something like YouTube TV with SVOD, is going to be $75, $80, which is a monthly savings. It's not a one-time savings. And so increasingly, we think that consumers are going to be doing these calculations and figuring out how to navigate the fragmentation, the increasing fragmentation in the landscape, but make it work for them and have more control over what's in their bundle and what they're paying.
I agree. There's definitely a lot of power in diversifying the players, both from, thinking of this as a consumer myself, but also as a marketer and thinking about the advertising opportunity that comes with it. Thanks so much for your time, Chris. We're at the end of it, but this has been incredibly educational. I'm excited to see what the future holds, not only for streaming specifically, but for, TiVo as a big game changer within the space.
No, thank you, Victoria. It's been great chatting with you.
Introducing TiVo Stream 4K. All your favorite entertainment, live or streaming, on one screen. TiVo Stream 4K. Streaming solved.